Okay, all my shooting buddies out there, doing a little video today on a new project I've been working on, which is a wet tumbler. Just finished this thing up. Took a couple of days to find all the material. Took, I don't know, a day and a half, something like that, to put it all together. It's a really neat contraption here. Again, probably the hardest part of building is finding all the parts and getting the measurement right for the belts. This thing ultimately spins your brass using not dry media like corn cob or walnut, things like that. It uses these very, very fine stainless steel rods. I don't know if you guys can see that, but and that's what it uses to go in and clean the brass out really well. You basically build these canisters up like this, and you put mostly water in there, put your brass in, you put your media in, put a little bit of Dawn in, a little bit of Lemmy Shine in there, and you put it on this thing, and it tumbles just like a washing machine. It tumbles this brass for a couple hours, I believe is what I'm going to try for my first run. Anyway, put a nice on-off switch here, power cord, a pretty heavy-duty 3rd horsepower motor, spins about 1750 RPM, lots of pillow blocks. That's really the big expense, is the motor and the pillow blocks. The rest of it comes from a local steel factory around here that I can get a much cheaper steel than I get at Lowe's or Home Depot. But it doesn't look like it. There's a lot of little parts on there that did come from Home Depot. So the cords, the box, the power boxes, the switches, all the mounting bolts, and all of the pillow blocks, these pads that it sits on. So anyway, pretty neat little contraption here. I've given it a quick dry run, but I certainly haven't. See if we can get down here and get a bird's eye view of it. Certainly haven't given it the brass a cleaning. And the reason I'm doing this is I use corncob media for the past year or so in one of these tumblers down here. I have a lot of brass that I clean. We do a good bit of shooting. This corncob media is good, but what it doesn't do always, I run it for 3 or 4 hours a pop, usually 4 hours a pop. If you look at these 45 shells, if you look at them up close, you'll see a lot of them still come out very, very tarnished. And I'm not real crazy about the way that looks. Again, it's a hobby for me, so I really want that brass looking good. And from research, what I found is if you put it in a wet tumbling process, the stainless steel rods, A, they will never wear out. You may lose some, but if you're careful, you won't. And B, it will polish that brass instead of just knocking the dirt off of it. Another thing you can look at here is kind of tough to tell, but the inside of the shells do not get cleaned. I'm sorry, I'm looking somewhere else. The inside of the shells don't get cleaned very well with that corncob media. It's kind of hard to tell. I don't think the light's right, but if I could find something like this that you can see in there, some of them come out clean, but others just come out just all grungy and grimy. And as I've started looking at reloading 223 shells, got these guys over here, got a bunch of brass ready to go for 223. But based on researching on it, I haven't cleaned any brass or reloaded brass yet. I'm still waiting on dies from Dylan. But what I've told is the best way to get them clean and polished is through the wet tumble process. So that's what I've looked online. There are not a lot, but there's a tumbler, there's a Big Dog tumblers out there, a couple of vendors that sell similar products. I took a look at what they had, and I also put a few caveats of my own on it. And again, I enjoy doing the building process, so I decided to build these things up. So the other thing you have to do in the wet process, if you want a thorough cleaning, is you have to deprime your brass. Whereas, again, you take the primers out of the back, as opposed to with dry tumbling, you can leave all the primers in. Picked up a Lee Universal deprimer, put it on top of my Dylan. You got everything else set up in there. You just really pull the top off of the Dylan, which does all your reload, and you put the deprimer on there, and they run through just as quick as you can pull the handle. So it's not really a big problem there. So got a lot of brass. I'm going to try to do some before and after pictures, and we'll see what we come up with. Get these things loaded up, filled up with water, and probably get this thing down on the ground so I can use the workbench for the rest of the day, and see how things turn out. Another thing that's worth noting is when you look at these canisters, those on the left are 2-gallon canisters and those on the right are 1-gallon canisters. Those things can hold, with the brass media in there, they can hold a good bit of shell. So when I look at my tumbler, I usually put a couple hundred rounds of 45s or maybe 250, 300 rounds of 9mm in my tumbler and tumble that for 4 hours. I can put, if I believe what I read, I can put the close to 1,000 rounds of 9mm in some of those larger tumblers, maybe 600 rounds of brass in the 45s in those larger tumblers. So while the wet tumbling process is a lot more labor intensive, you have to deprime, you then have to tumble, you then have to clean it, sort and sift out the brass, and then clean out the stainless steel rods. Then you have to dry the brass. Again, if you do this as a hobby, you can crank through a lot more brass, I believe, and we'll see, but you can crank through a lot more brass overall, but it's still a labor intensive process. If you timed it on the clock, you probably end up taking a little bit longer because of the extra steps with wet tumbling, but you're going to have a lot prettier brass. So I wanted to get some before and after shots. This is all deprimed 45 brass that I polished with the dry tumbler within the last week. I've basically gone back now that I've built the wet tumbler and deprimed the brass, and we're going to run it through and see if there's really any difference in end product, if you will. These shells right here are a very good example of what I'm talking about. Although these have been run through a dry tumbler, you can still see a lot of fading, tarnish, if you will, on the brass. And I could put them back in and keep tumbling them, but when I pull out, work so hard to reload these things and then pull out a shell, looks like that, it just kind of gets on my nerves. Dirty primer pockets in there, the inside's filthy, things like that. So anyway, here's the before picture on 45 brass. Here's a good before and after on 9mm brass. Some of this brass has been tumbled, some of it has not been tumbled. I brought some back from a recent shooting session that we did, and just deprimed those and put them in with some of my brass that I'd already tumbled in the dry system. So this ought to provide a good contrast. See how this thing works. Okay, so we got about 4 pounds of 45 brass in the red container, the smaller one there. We got about 8 pounds of 9mm brass in the big blue container. So I'm going to go ahead and turn this puppy on and see what happens. There we go. Not too loud. You certainly know it's on because it's washing in there, but that's pretty good. Let's see what happens in about 3 hours. Maybe I'll go 2 hours and see what it looks like. Okay, let these guys tumble for about 2.5 hours. I must say, I don't know if the camera picks up on it, but the shells definitely are a whole lot cleaner. You can look in there. There's very little, if any, fouling or gunk inside the shells. Primer pockets are good and cleaned out. It's really pretty amazing what a little bit of tumbling will do, and a little bit of detergent. So got this old Frankfurt Arsenal thing here that I'm dumping all my shavings in. They're all on the bottom of that bucket. That won't be a problem. We'll dump it out and put them all right back in with some clean water and get ready for another batch. Looks pretty good. Okay, here's what about 8 pounds of 9mm brass looks like after about 2.5 hours. Same result as the 45s. Good primer pocket clean, good inside the case clean. I must say, so far I'm very pleased with the results of the wet wash. Looks really good.